Marcus had always been fascinated by the interstellar trade bazaar on Station Epsilon 7. As a junior xenobiologist fresh out of the academy, he dreamed of this posting for years. The sprawling marketplace was a melting pot of a dozen different species, each with their own customs, languages, and unspoken rules. What he hadn't counted on was learning those rules the hard way. The first 3 months had been relatively smooth. Marcus worked as a cultural liaison, helping resolve minor disputes between traders and ensuring that interspecies commerce flowed without major incidents. His supervisor, Director Patricia Hawthorne, had made it clear that maintaining peace in the bazaar was paramount. One wrong move, one cultural misunderstanding, and the delicate balance could collapse, potentially costing the station millions in lost revenue. The Kithurian delegation had arrived 2 weeks ago, and Marcus had been assigned to monitor their activities. The Kithurians were a proud warrior species, humanoid in appearance but with enhanced physical capabilities and predatory instincts. Their society was strictly hierarchical, with clear rules about dominance and submission. The females, particularly those of high rank, were known to be extremely territorial and quick to perceived slights. Commander Vexthara was the delegation's leader, an imposing figure who stood nearly 7 feet tall with corded muscles and skin that seemed to shimmer with an inner energy. Her eyes were a startling amber color that seemed to track everything around her with predatory intensity. Marcus had been briefed extensively about Kithurian customs, particularly their concept of territorial marking, and the importance of showing proper deference to ranking females. On the morning that would change everything, Marcus was making his usual rounds through the bazaar. The air was thick with the scent of exotic spices and the hum of universal translators working overtime. He paused at Jennings' stall, where old Tom Jennings sold artifacts from Earth's colonial period. The elderly trader had become something of a mentor to Marcus, sharing stories about the early days of interstellar commerce. "Morning, Tom," Marcus said, accepting a cup of synthetic coffee. "How's business?" Jennings grinned, his weathered face crinkling. "Can't complain, son. That Altarian collector bought 3 more pieces yesterday. Says they remind him of his home world." He gestured toward a small carved wooden figure. "Funny how beauty translates across species, isn't it?" Marcus nodded, genuinely smiling at the older man's enthusiasm. It was exactly this kind of positive interaction that made his job worthwhile. The bazaar wasn't just about commerce. It was about building bridges between worlds, creating understanding where there had once been only suspicion and fear. He was still smiling when he turned to continue his rounds, and that's when he saw her. Commander Vexthara stood about 20 feet away, her amber eyes locked onto him with an intensity that made his blood run cold. For a moment, time seemed frozen. The bustling sounds of the bazaar faded into background noise as Marcus tried to process the expression on the Kithurian's face. It wasn't just anger. It was something much more dangerous, a primal rage that seemed to emanate from her like heat from a forge. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides, and Marcus could see the muscles in her jaw working as she ground her teeth together. Every instinct he had was screaming at him to run, but his training kept him rooted in place. "Did I do something wrong?" he whispered to himself. mentally reviewing every interaction he'd had with the Kithurian delegation. He'd been scrupulously careful to follow protocol, always addressing Commander Vexthara with the proper honorifics, never making direct eye contact for too long, always deferring to her authority in group settings. The answer came with terrifying swiftness. Commander Vexthara began walking toward him, her movements fluid and predatory. Each step was deliberate, controlled, like a hunter stalking prey. Other traders and visitors in the bazaar seemed to sense the danger instinctively, creating a widening circle of empty space around the approaching confrontation. Human, her voice carried easily across the distance, enhanced by her species' natural vocal cords. The word wasn't just an identification, it was an accusation, loaded with contempt and fury. You dare show territorial challenge in my presence. Marcus felt his mouth go dry. Territorial challenge. He tried to recall his briefings about Kithurian culture, but his mind was blanking under the pressure of those amber eyes boring into him. Commander, I don't understand. I haven't challenged anyone. Her laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. You display submission markers to lesser beings while in my domain. You show teeth in gesture of dominance after acknowledging my presence. This is grave insult in my people's ways. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His smile, his friendly interaction with Tom Jennings. In Kithurian culture, showing teeth, smiling, was indeed a sign of aggression or dominance challenge. And doing so after acknowledging a ranking female's presence could be interpreted as a direct insult to her authority. Commander, please, it was a misunderstanding. In human culture, smiling is a sign of friendship, not aggression. I meant no disrespect to you or your delegation. But even as he spoke, Marcus could see that his words were falling on deaf ears. Commander Vexthara had already decided on her course of action, and nothing he said was going to change her mind. The Kithurian concept of honor demanded satisfaction, and in their society, perceived slights were answered with physical correction. Your ignorance is not shield from consequences, she said, now close enough that Marcus could see the small scars that marked her face and neck, battle marks that spoke of a lifetime of combat. You will learn proper respect. The next few seconds happened so fast that Marcus barely had time to register them. Commander Vexthara moved with inhuman speed, her hand shooting out to grab the front of his uniform. Her grip was like iron, and before he could even think about resisting, she had lifted him completely off the ground with one arm. The sensation of flying through the air was surreal. Marcus had time to see the shocked faces of bystanders, the colorful awnings of market stalls, the distant ceiling of the bazaar section spinning past his vision. Then he hit the ground hard, rolling several times before coming to a stop against a stack of cargo containers 30 feet from where he'd been standing. Pain exploded through his body as he tried to push himself up from the deck plating. His left shoulder felt like it was on fire, and he could taste blood in his mouth. Through the ringing in his ears, he could hear voices shouting, the sound of running feet, and underneath it all, the low, satisfied growl of Commander Vexthara. Let this be lesson to all who would show disrespect in my presence. Her voice carried clearly across the suddenly silent bazaar. Kithurian honor demands proper acknowledgement. As Marcus struggled to sit up, his mind was already racing beyond the immediate pain and humiliation. This wasn't just a personal assault. It was an international incident waiting to happen. The Kithurian trade agreement was worth billions of credits, and Commander Vexthara's actions had just put the entire relationship in jeopardy. Worse, he knew that Director Hawthorne would be looking for someone to blame, and that someone would likely be him. He could already hear the whispers starting among the crowd that had gathered. News traveled fast in the bazaar, and by the end of the day, every trader, diplomat, and administrator on the station would know that the human cultural liaison had been publicly humiliated by the Kithurian commander. His career, his reputation, everything he'd worked for was crumbling around him, and all because of a simple smile. As station security finally arrived to help him to his feet, Marcus caught sight of Commander Vexthara watching from across the bazaar. There was no remorse in those amber eyes, no recognition that she had just crossed a line that shouldn't have been crossed. In her mind, she had simply maintained order and defended her honor according to her people's customs. But Marcus was human, not Kithurian, and he had his own concepts of justice and fairness. As the medics checked him for serious injuries and prepared to transport him to the medical bay, a cold determination began to settle in his chest. Commander Vexthara might think she had taught him a lesson about respect, but she was about to learn something about human persistence and the dangers of underestimating a species that had clawed its way to the stars through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. The medical bay on Station Epsilon 7 was a testament to interspecies cooperation, equipped to handle the physiological needs of dozens of different alien species. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, the chief medical officer, had seen her share of bizarre injuries over the years, but she still raised an eyebrow when Marcus was brought in. "Let me guess," she said, running a scanner over his bruised ribs. "Cultural misunderstanding." Marcus winced as she probed a particularly tender spot on his shoulder. "You could say that." He gave her a brief rundown of what had happened, watching her expression grow increasingly grim as he described Commander Vexthara's reaction to his smile. "Marcus, you know I have to file a report about this," Dr. Rodriguez said, sealing a dermal regenerator over a cut on his forehead. "An unprovoked assault on a station official, regardless of the cultural context, is a serious matter." "I know, Amanda, but I also know how these things play out. The Kithurians are here to negotiate a massive trade deal. The station administrators aren't going to want to rock the boat over what they'll classify as a minor incident." His prediction proved accurate sooner than he'd expected. Director Hawthorne arrived at the medical bay less than an hour after Marcus had been admitted, her face set in the carefully neutral expression she wore when delivering bad news. "Mr. Torres," she said, using his formal surname instead of his first name, never a good sign. "I've reviewed the incident report and spoken with Commander Vexthara's delegation." Marcus sat up straighter on the medical bed, ignoring the protest from his bruised ribs. "And The Kithurians have agreed to file a formal complaint about the incident, but they're not pressing for criminal charges. They consider the matter resolved through their traditional justice system. Traditional justice system. Marcus felt his anger flaring. She threw me across the bazaar like a rag doll because I smiled at a shopkeeper. That's not justice, that's assault. Director Hawthorne's expression didn't change. According to Kithurian law, you committed a territorial transgression by displaying dominance behaviors in the presence of a ranking female. Commander Vexthara was within her rights to correct that behavior using appropriate force. Appropriate force. Patricia, she could have killed me. And even if we accept their cultural interpretation, this is a Federation station operating under Federation law, not Kithurian law. The Cultural Accommodation Clause in their trade agreement gives them certain jurisdictional privileges in matters of honor and tradition. Director Hawthorne's tone made it clear she wasn't happy about the situation either, but she was trapped by the political realities. Look, Marcus, I know this isn't fair, but the Kithurian trade deal is worth 12 billion credits annually. We can't afford to lose it over a cultural incident. Marcus stared at her in disbelief. So what you're telling me is that as long as they frame it as a cultural issue, the Kithurians can assault Federation citizens with impunity. I'm telling you that sometimes diplomacy requires us to accept outcomes that don't feel just on a personal level. Director Hawthorne's voice softened slightly. I'm recommending you for medical leave. Take some time to recover, and when you come back, I'll see about getting you reassigned to a different section. After she left, Marcus lay back on the medical bed and stared at the ceiling. Reassignment. The diplomatic way of saying his career in interspecies relations was over. He'd be shuffled off to some quiet administrative posting where his incident wouldn't be an embarrassment to the department. Dr. Rodriguez returned a few minutes later with his discharge papers. You're free to go, but I want you to take it easy for the next few days. No heavy lifting, and if you experience any dizziness or nausea, come back immediately. As Marcus was gathering his things, she added quietly, For what it's worth, I think what happened to you was completely unacceptable. There's got to be something in the station regulations about protecting staff from this kind of treatment. Her words sparked an idea. Marcus had been thinking about this all wrong, focusing on the cultural aspects and diplomatic implications. But at its core, this was a workplace safety issue. Station Epsilon 7 had strict protocols about maintaining a safe working environment for all personnel, regardless of species or cultural background. Over the next 2 days, while he recovered in his quarters, Marcus immersed himself in the station's operational manual and Federation workplace safety regulations. What he found was interesting. While the Cultural Accommodation Clause did give the Kithurians some leeway in matters of honor and tradition, it didn't override basic safety protocols for station personnel. More importantly, he discovered that Commander Vexthara had violated several specific regulations regarding the use of force on Federation property. The Cultural Accommodation Clause was designed to prevent minor cultural misunderstandings from escalating into diplomatic incidents, not to provide blanket immunity for physical assault. Armed with this knowledge, Marcus requested a meeting with Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, the station's security chief. Morrison was a no-nonsense former Marine who had little patience for diplomatic double talk. "I've read the incident report," Morrison said, gesturing for Marcus to sit across from his desk. "Officially, my hands are tied. The director has classified this as a resolved cultural matter." "But unofficially?" Marcus asked. Morrison leaned back in his chair. "Unofficially, I think the Cathurians are testing us. They want to see how far they can push before we push back. And if we don't establish boundaries now, this won't be the last incident." "What if I told you that Commander Vexthara violated at least 6 specific safety regulations, and that the cultural accommodation clause doesn't actually cover the use of physical force against station personnel?" Morrison's expression grew more interested. "I'd say you've been doing your homework. But even if that's true, getting the administration to act on it is another matter entirely." Marcus had anticipated this obstacle. "What if we approach it from a different angle? Instead of challenging the cultural accommodation directly, what if we focus on ensuring that all delegation members receive proper safety briefings? Make it about education and prevention rather than punishment." "Go on." "The station safety manual requires all visiting dignitaries to attend a comprehensive briefing on Federation safety protocols and emergency procedures. I checked the records. The Cathurian delegation never received this briefing. That's a violation of standard procedure." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, then smiled grimly. "You know what, Tors? I think you're right. As security chief, I have a responsibility to ensure that all visitors are properly informed about station safety protocols. I'll schedule a mandatory briefing for the entire Cathurian delegation. And if they refuse to attend, then they'll be in violation of station regulations, and I'll have grounds to restrict their access to certain areas of the station until they comply." Morrison stood up and extended his hand. "I can't promise this will give you the satisfaction you're looking for, but it's a start." As Marcus shook the security chief's hand, he felt a spark of hope for the first time since the incident in the bazaar. It wasn't about revenge. It was about establishing that Federation citizens had rights that couldn't be trampled, regardless of cultural differences or economic considerations. The mandatory safety briefing was scheduled for the following morning, and Marcus made sure he was in attendance. He watched with grim satisfaction as Commander Vexthara and her delegation were forced to sit through 2 hours of detailed explanations about Federation safety protocols, workplace harassment policies, and the proper procedures for resolving cultural conflicts. When the section on physical altercations was covered, Morrison made eye contact with Commander Vexthara and spoke slowly and clearly. "Under Federation regulations, the use of physical force against station personnel is strictly prohibited, regardless of cultural context. Any violation of this policy will result in immediate restrictions on station access and potential criminal charges." Commander Vexthara's amber eyes flashed with anger, but she remained silent. Marcus could see her struggling with the implications of what she was hearing. In her mind, She had acted within her rights according to Kithurian law. But now she was being told that her actions were not only unacceptable but potentially criminal under Federation law. After the briefing, Marcus lingered in the conference room as the Kithurians filed out. Commander Vexthara paused beside his chair, looking down at him with those predatory eyes. "You think you have achieved victory, human," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus met her gaze steadily. "I think I've achieved understanding, Commander. You taught me about Kithurian concepts of honor and respect. I've just returned the favor by teaching you about Federation concepts of justice and equality." For a moment, he thought she might strike him again. Her hands clenched into fists, and he could see the muscles in her jaw working. But then she seemed to remember where they were, surrounded by Federation security personnel and recording devices. "This matter is not concluded," she said finally, then turned and walked out of the room. Morrison approached Marcus as the room emptied. "You know she's right, don't you? This isn't over. The Kithurians don't forget perceived slights, and they're not going to let this pass without some kind of response." Marcus nodded. "I know, but at least now it's clear that there are consequences for crossing certain lines. Maybe the next time a Kithurian feels the urge to correct a Federation citizen, they'll think twice." 3 days after the mandatory safety briefing, Marcus received word that he was being transferred to the station's Xenobiology Research Division, not as a punishment, but as a promotion. Director Hawthorne explained that his unique experience with interspecies relations made him an ideal candidate for the position. It was a face-saving move all around. Marcus got to keep his career and his dignity. The administration avoided a diplomatic incident, and the Kithurians could claim that the matter had been resolved through proper channels. But Marcus knew the real victory wasn't in his promotion or in the mandatory briefings. It was in the precedent that had been set. The next Federation citizen who found themselves on the wrong end of a cultural correction would have a clear path to justice, and visiting delegations would know that Federation citizens weren't fair game for arbitrary punishment. The week following Marcus's transfer to the Xenobiology Division should have been a period of settling into new routines and leaving the incident behind. Instead, it marked the beginning of a more complex phase of the conflict with Commander Vexthara and her delegation. Dr. Sarah Kellerman, the head of xenobiology, was a brilliant scientist in her 60s who had spent decades studying interspecies psychology and behavior. When Marcus arrived at her lab, she greeted him with a knowing smile. "I've been following your situation with considerable interest," she said, leading him through a laboratory filled with biological specimens from dozens of worlds. "Your experience with the Kithurians presents a unique research opportunity." "I'm not sure I follow," Marcus replied, though he had a sinking feeling about where this conversation was heading. "The Kithurian social structure is one of the most rigid and hierarchical we've encountered," Dr. Kellerman explained, stopping beside a holographic display showing Kithurian neural patterns. "Their concept of honor and dominance isn't just cultural. It's hardwired into their neurological structure through millions of years of evolution. She manipulated the display, highlighting specific brain regions. What's fascinating about your incident is that you managed to trigger not just a cultural response, but a genuine neurological one. Commander Vexthara's reaction was as involuntary as breathing. Marcus studied the brain scans with growing unease. Are you saying she couldn't help herself? I'm saying that from her perspective, your actions represented a genuine threat to her psychological well-being. In Kithurian society, allowing a perceived challenge to go unanswered can lead to complete social rejection, which is essentially a death sentence for their species. So what are you telling me? That I should feel sorry for her? Dr. Kellerman shook her head. I'm telling you that this situation is far from over. Kithurians don't just seek resolution, they seek what they call balance restoration. Until Commander Vexthara feels that the scales have been properly balanced, she'll continue to view you as an unresolved threat. As if summoned by their conversation, Marcus's communicator chimed with an urgent message from Lieutenant Commander Morrison. Tors, get to security immediately. We have a situation. When Marcus arrived at the security office, he found Morrison reviewing surveillance footage with two of his officers. On the screen, Marcus could see Commander Vexthara moving through the station's corridors with obvious purpose. She's been conducting what she calls informal investigations into your background and activities, Morrison explained. Technically, she's not violating any regulations, but she's gathering intelligence on you with the thoroughness of a military operation. The footage showed Commander Vexthara speaking with various station personnel, accessing public records, and even visiting the bazaar stalls where Marcus regularly conducted his rounds. It was clear that she was building a comprehensive profile of his habits, relationships, and potential vulnerabilities. What's she looking for? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. An opportunity, Morrison replied grimly. Kithurians are patient hunters. She's waiting for you to make a mistake, violate a regulation, or put yourself in a position where she can legitimately respond according to her cultural norms. Over the following days, Marcus became acutely aware of being watched. Commander Vexthara wasn't obvious about it, but he could feel her presence at the edges of his daily routine. She appeared at the same cafeteria when he took his meals, browsed the same sections of the station's library when he conducted research, and somehow always seemed to be in the vicinity when he moved through the public areas. The psychological pressure was intense. Marcus found himself second-guessing every action, analyzing every word before he spoke, and constantly looking over his shoulder. It was exactly what Commander Vexthara wanted, to make him feel hunted and vulnerable. But Marcus had learned something important from his previous encounter with the Kithurian commander. He wasn't going to be a passive victim waiting for her next move. If she wanted to play a game of psychological warfare, he would engage on his own terms. His first move was to request a meeting with the Kithurian cultural attaché, an older male named Subcommander Torvek, who served as an intermediary between the delegation and station administration. Torvek was more diplomatic than his commander, but no less proud of his species' traditions. I understand that Commander Vexthara feels that our previous encounter left matters unresolved, Marcus began, choosing his words carefully. I want to find a solution that honors both Kithurian tradition and Federation law. Torvik studied him with dark eyes that lacked the predatory intensity of his commander's gaze. You speak of honor, human, but do you understand what this means to my people? I'm beginning to, Marcus replied. I've been studying Kithurian culture and psychology. I know that unresolved conflicts can cause genuine psychological distress for your species. Then you know that Commander Vexthara cannot simply forget this matter. In her mind, you have claimed dominance over her through your actions and their consequences. This creates what we call status dissonance, a condition that will continue to worsen until proper balance is restored. Marcus had hoped for this opening. What if we could find a way to restore balance that doesn't involve further physical confrontation? In human culture, we have concepts of honor satisfaction that don't require violence. Torvik looked intrigued despite himself. Explain. A formal challenge conducted under controlled conditions with agreed-upon rules. Not a fight, but a test of knowledge, skill, or wit. The winner gains status. The loser accepts the outcome with dignity. You would risk your reputation against Commander Vexthara's, Torvik asked, surprised. She is one of our finest tactical minds and warriors. I'm not proposing a contest of strength or military tactics, Marcus clarified. I'm suggesting a challenge more suited to our respective expertise, a test of cultural knowledge and diplomatic skill. The idea was risky, but Marcus had been thinking about it since his conversation with Dr. Kellerman. If Commander Vexthara's psychological need for dominance was driving her behavior, then providing her with a legitimate opportunity to demonstrate her superiority might satisfy that need without further violence. Torvik promised to discuss the proposal with his commander, and Marcus spent the next 2 days preparing for what he hoped would be the final confrontation. He studied everything he could find about Kithurian history, culture, and diplomatic traditions. More importantly, he crafted a challenge that would allow Commander Vexthara to demonstrate her knowledge and skill while establishing clear boundaries for future interactions. The response came sooner than he'd expected. Commander Vexthara agreed to the formal challenge, but on her terms. The contest would be held in the station's main assembly hall, open to observation by both delegations and station personnel. It would consist of 3 phases: cultural knowledge, strategic thinking, and diplomatic negotiation. Marcus felt a mix of excitement and terror as he prepared for the challenge. This was his chance to end the psychological warfare and establish a working relationship with the Kithurian delegation. But if he failed, he would be publicly humiliated again, and this time there would be no regulations or safety protocols to protect him. The night before the challenge, Dr. Kellerman visited him in his quarters. "You know, this is either brilliant or completely insane," she said, settling into a chair across from his desk. "Probably both," Marcus admitted. "But I can't keep living with her hunting me through the corridors. This way, at least the outcome will be decisive." "Just remember," Dr. Kellerman said seriously, Winning isn't always about being right. Sometimes it's about finding a solution that allows everyone to maintain their dignity. Her words would prove prophetic in ways Marcus couldn't have imagined. The main assembly hall of Station Epsilon 7 was packed to capacity on the morning of the formal challenge. Word had spread throughout the station about the unprecedented event, and representatives from a dozen different species had gathered to witness what many were calling a historic moment in interspecies relations. Marcus stood on one side of the raised platform that had been constructed for the occasion, wearing his formal Federation diplomatic uniform. Across from him, Commander Vexthara wore the ceremonial armor of a Kithurian warrior diplomat, its polished surfaces reflecting the assembly hall's lights like liquid metal. Between them stood Arbitrator Z.H. Kahl, a member of the neutral Centaurian Mediation Corps who had been chosen to oversee the challenge. The Centaurians were renowned throughout the galaxy for their impartiality and their ability to navigate complex cultural protocols. This formal challenge is convened according to the ancient traditions of honorable contest, Arbitrator Z.H. Kahl announced, his translated voice carrying clearly throughout the hall. 3 phases will determine the outcome: knowledge of cultural traditions, strategic thinking, and diplomatic resolution of conflict. The first phase began with questions about interspecies history and cultural practices. Marcus had expected this to be his weakest area, given Commander Vexthara's obvious expertise and experience. But as the questions progressed, he realized that his recent intensive study of Kithurian culture was paying dividends. When asked about the historical significance of the Treaty of Kithuros Prime, both contestants provided accurate answers. When questioned about proper protocols for addressing members of the Altarian Council, both demonstrated thorough knowledge. It became clear that this phase would be decided by subtle differences in understanding rather than obvious gaps in knowledge. The turning point came when Arbitrator Z.H. Kahl asked about the cultural significance of ritual scarification among the warrior castes of the Rigel system. Marcus provided a textbook answer, accurate but clinical. Commander Vexthara's response was equally accurate but included personal insights that could only come from direct experience. "The scars are not mere decoration," she said, unconsciously touching a small mark on her own neck. "They are living history, each one representing a moment of growth through adversity. To understand their significance, one must understand that for warriors, survival itself is an art form." It was a beautiful answer, and Marcus found himself genuinely impressed by her insight. When the first phase concluded, Commander Vexthara held a slight advantage in points, but the margin was much smaller than anyone had expected. The second phase focused on strategic thinking through a series of theoretical scenarios. Both contestants were presented with complex diplomatic situations and asked to propose solutions. This was where Marcus had hoped to gain ground, given his training in conflict resolution and diplomatic theory. The scenarios were challenging: mediating a trade dispute between species with incompatible biochemistry, negotiating safe passage through contested space, resolving territorial claims on a newly discovered world. Each situation required not just knowledge of law and precedent, but creative thinking and the ability to find solutions that satisfied multiple competing interests. Marcus approached each scenario methodically, drawing on his training to identify stakeholder interests and craft win-win solutions. His answers were thorough and well-reasoned, earning nods of approval from the Federation observers in the audience. Commander Vexthara's approach was different but equally effective. Her responses showed a deep understanding of power dynamics and the psychology of negotiation. Where Marcus sought to satisfy all parties, she focused on identifying the most critical interests and building solutions around those core needs. When they were presented with a scenario involving a hostage situation on a diplomatic vessel, their different approaches became most apparent. Marcus proposed a careful negotiation strategy designed to minimize risk to all parties. Commander Vexthara outlined a bold plan that would resolve the situation quickly, but required accepting higher initial risk in exchange for a more decisive outcome. Sometimes, she explained to the arbitrator, the kindest action is also the most decisive. Prolonged uncertainty causes more suffering than brief, intense resolution. By the end of the second phase, the contest was essentially tied. Both contestants had demonstrated their expertise, but in different ways that reflected their species' cultural values. The audience was riveted, realizing they were witnessing something unprecedented, a true meeting of minds between two very different approaches to problem solving. The final phase was where everything would be decided. Arbitrator Z.H. Call presented them with a real scenario drawn from recent events, their own conflict and its aftermath. They were asked to propose a solution that would satisfy Kithurian concepts of honor while respecting Federation principles of justice and equality. Marcus went first, and he had prepared for this moment carefully. The root of our conflict was a failure of communication and understanding, he began. I acted according to human customs without considering how those actions might be interpreted by someone from a different cultural background. Commander Vexthara responded according to her people's traditions, but in a setting governed by different rules. He paused, looking directly at Commander Vexthara. I propose that true resolution comes not from determining who was right or wrong, but from establishing a framework for preventing similar misunderstandings in the future. I suggest the creation of a joint cultural advisory board, staffed by representatives from both our peoples, to provide guidance for future diplomatic interactions. It was a good answer, focused on practical solutions and mutual benefit. But Marcus could see from Commander Vexthara's expression that she had something different in mind. When her turn came, Commander Vexthara stood silently for a long moment, her amber eyes scanning the audience before settling on Marcus. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight of authority that commanded absolute attention. My worthy opponent speaks of frameworks and advisory boards, she said. These are valuable tools, but they address symptoms rather than causes. The true issue is not that we misunderstood each other's customs, but that we failed to recognize each other's essential nature. She stepped closer to the center of the platform, her ceremonial armor gleaming. I saw disrespect where none was intended. He saw aggression where none was meant. We both acted according to our nature, but without wisdom. Then, in a move that stunned everyone in the assembly hall, Commander Vexthara removed one of her ceremonial gauntlets and extended her bare hand toward Marcus. I propose a different solution. Let us acknowledge that we are both warriors in our own way. He fights with words and ideas. I fight with strength and will. Let us pledge to be allies rather than adversaries, to combine our different strengths in service of greater understanding. The gesture was profoundly significant in Kithurian culture. By offering her bare hand, Commander Vexthara was indicating that she viewed Marcus as an equal, worthy of trust and respect. It was the highest honor she could offer to someone from another species. Marcus realized that this moment would define not just the outcome of their challenge, but the entire future relationship between their peoples on the station. He stepped forward and grasped her hand firmly, feeling the calluses that spoke of a lifetime of training and combat. "I accept your alliance, Commander," he said formally, "and I pledge to be worthy of the trust you've shown me." The assembly hall erupted in applause from dozens of different species, each showing approval in their own cultural way. Arbitrator Z.H. Kahl declared the challenge concluded with honor satisfied on both sides, an almost unprecedented outcome in formal interspecies challenges. But the real victory wasn't in the formal resolution. It was in what happened afterward, as Marcus and Commander Vexthara worked together to establish new protocols for cultural exchange. Their joint advisory board became a model that was adopted by stations throughout the Federation, preventing countless future conflicts through proactive education and understanding. 6 months later, Marcus received a promotion to Senior Cultural Affairs Officer, with responsibilities spanning multiple star systems. Commander Vexthara recommended him personally for the position, noting in her official report that he had demonstrated the wisdom to turn potential enemies into valuable allies. Their working relationship became one of mutual respect and genuine friendship. Commander Vexthara taught Marcus about Kithurian concepts of honor and strength, while he helped her understand the Federation's complex web of diplomatic traditions and legal frameworks. The bizarre incident that had started everything became a cautionary tale told throughout the diplomatic corps, a reminder that cultural understanding requires more than just memorizing customs and traditions. It requires the wisdom to look beyond surface behaviors and recognize the essential humanity, or in this case, the essential dignity, that exists in all sentient beings. On the anniversary of their first encounter, Marcus and Commander Vexthara met at Tom Jennings' stall in the bazaar. The old trader had prepared a special display of artifacts from both Earth and the Kithurian homeworld, calling it his Unity Collection.